Hello and welcome to An Evening with Nirvana. It's a podcast where I talk to a series of guests from the Doom community, some people outside of it occasionally, about things like level design, map creation, mini making, speedrunning, things of that nature. Today I'm talking to 4Shockblast. He's one of the best known speedrunners in the Doom community, who you may specifically know for his 8-second run of E1M1 or any of his other 3,000 plus runs on DSDA. He's also mapped for many of the Abyssal Speedmapping Sessions, 50 Shades of Graytall, and several other projects. Welcome to the podcast, 4Shock. How are you doing today?
Thanks. I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Actually sunny for once. It's been freezing here for a really long time.
Isn't it? It should be summer. I guess it's actually freezing here. I think it's gotten cold.
Yeah.
Snowing, which is nice, I guess. Here, I like seeing snow in winter. It's sad not to see it sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's meant to be summer here, but it's been winter for like 6
Yeah.
months, so that's great.
Oh wow, fun.
Yep. Uh, so I'll start us off with the classic question, the mundane one. When did you first get introduced to Doom?
I have like awful memory for life events. I thought about this before, like in Urban Nest. It's like I know I played it when I was a kid, and I think it. And my brother played it, so that's probably how I got into it. But I don't even really remember it from childhood that much. I know I had Doom 2,
Mm-hmm.
and I know I had um, like shareware. I think we had these, and I still have some. I think it's somewhere, but these like clearly bootleg CDs from like Eastern Europe with like all kinds of usually shareware games on them, and it's probably somewhere we got Doom 2. I'm almost certainly not legally. Um, and then that's I remember playing it. I don't remember that much about it. Besides that, I don't think it was like a big thing for me. Um, I remember like whenever I think of like childhood games, it's like always I think Blood more because that one was really scary for a kid
Uh-huh.
compared to Doom, and maybe Duke Nukem. Um, so then when eventually I just like got back into like other games, and then OSRS was a big thing for me in high school, and I think at one point I was just like all my friends from school were no longer playing OSRS, and I was just like thinking that it was just basically a waste of time, which it really, I mean, it's just a grind.
Right, yeah.
So I was looking for a new game, and I don't know why I even like 10 years ago, I guess, is when I got back into it, like 2011, 2012, and I already don't remember why. Like, I don't remember why I looked for Doom specifically. Like, it's completely blank. Like, I just know I think I found videos about it and got into some random ports and was playing like some WADs, and then maybe found. But probably most likely, my guess at this point is that I probably found like a task or something, and then I thought that looked really cool, and I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
like be a part of that. So
Yeah, people tend to leave and then like there'll be a big gap and then they'll come back after like playing it when they were a kid or something. It seems to be very common.
yeah, but I guess the weird part is just I don't remember it being like a big thing from childhood, but I don't know. It's been a long time, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of these things are kind of blank for me. I remember Quake 2 actually being like the big games when I was a kid, other than Blood, was also like I guess Quake 2. I remember I played a lot of like multiplayer of that one
Uh-huh.
and a bit of Quake 3. Never really played Quake. I never played Quake at all, like the original. But Quake 2 and 3 were kind of, and my brother played a lot of those. So that's sort of why I think I did a lot of multiplayer of that one. But I never got back into any of the Quakes. So
Right. So you don't really remember your like first iWAD experiences, like which one you might have played the most or enjoyed the most?
I know for sure it was Doom 2, because I just didn't have Final Doom. I didn't know Final Doom existed, or I mean, most of Doom 1.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And I know for sure I played mostly with cheats. Like I wasn't someone who got into any sort of yeah, most games when I was a kid that I played were either easy or I just played with cheats.
Yeah.
Um, so I didn't get into the challenge stuff. Beyond that, like I don't remember anything from playing like different maps and stuff like that. Probably a lot of just like you're invulnerable and you have infinite rockets and you're just shooting everything sort of thing.
Yeah.
Just what I would have done.
Again, a very
Um,
common thread. People playing Doom with cheats
yeah,
when they were a kid.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I was kind of curious where your name comes from, actually. Was that a multiplayer name that you came up with?
So I came up with came out of OSRS actually in like
Uh,
2007 or something. When I was a kid, I liked the name Fireblast for some reason. I guess it sounded cool, but OSRS by that point was a when I got an account in like 2008 or something. It was a pretty like there was a lot of people already on it. So that name was gone, and it just gave me 4Shockblast, and I was like, okay, I
right.
guess. And then I just that I stuck with it was just a default or like a random offer, and I'm like, I'll take it, and it became 4Shockblast forever, I guess.
Yeah. I
But
I know a few
yeah,
people who have names that came from like a generated name or something.
yeah, that's basically it. It sounded kind of cool. I do generally like it, at least in the sense that it's easy to Google and typically is I've almost never seen it be taken on any website. So
Yeah.
the only annoying part is when it starts with a number. Some websites don't like that, but then I
Mhm.
just swap it
Oh, right.
from the start to the end. Um, even in Graytall, I think I'm credited as Shockblast for it, probably because of my email address or something.
Right.
So
Yeah, I didn't notice that actually, but
yeah,
that's kind of funny. So was Doom your first speed game then, or did you speedrun other
yeah,
games? Okay.
yeah. I wasn't like a I didn't don't know that I even knew about speedrunning before like 2011 or before Doom. I mean speedrunning wasn't that big,
Mhm.
and like I think overall speedrunning became big and like GDQ kind of ramped it up, and then more recently stuff like the Carl videos and Summoning Salt, etc. That's what really brought into the main focus. Like that even regular people or regular like gaming people who know about gaming usually know about it.
Yeah.
Um, but like back then, there wasn't like a general speedrunning. The general speedrunning community was kind of very niche, and then Doom was its own thing, and it sort of stuck that way. So I found Doom, and I don't even think I really found other speedrunning. Um, like it was very separate for a long time.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
GDQ was definitely my first introduction to speedruns.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah, GDQ came, like, after that, but
yeah.
yeah.
Although I do remember getting the like unlocking the cheats for GoldenEye and Perfect Dark for Nintendo 64, and
Mm.
you had to speedrun in order to get those. So I guess that was technically my first
Oh, okay.
introduction without even knowing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I never had consoles as a kid. Just my family never my parents didn't believe in, like, paying, for a console because, like, you already have a computer. Like, it was kinda like that sort of logic, like, why
Right.
would you want another thing that a computer already does that and also does everything else?
Mhm.
Which I think is partially kind of what you'd get from like um, people coming from Ukraine, where I mean there wasn't really a console culture because
Mhm.
people didn't really even they weren't the thing, both because of the fact that all the consoles were in the U.S. and also or Asia or Europe, and also because of just monetary. It would have been an expensive investment.
Yeah.
So they were always kind of a little behind technologically in that respect. And then by like 2000s, they still were kind of like that, had that mindset. So I didn't really have consoles, and I never. So I only played. That's another reason why I would have played like Doom or something, is because we didn't have any other like any game. More of my friends would have like a Nintendo or something, and I would only play that at friends' houses when I was a
Right.
kid.
Well, that's another common thing actually is people's first experience with Doom will be them going to someone else's house and playing Doom on their computer for the first time.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah. For me, it was my brother for sure. But yeah,
Right, yeah.
that's my friend, I guess, quote
hmm
unquote.
And do you remember like what got you into speedrunning Doom in the first place? Was it a particular P word or was it like watching like a task like you said or something?
I think it was probably watching tasks. Like maybe I found Doom 2 tests. Those are videos that were uploaded to YouTube a long time ago. Um, and just thought, I mean, they did look really cool. I don't remember precisely like what made me decide to do that. Um, it was kind of hard to even get into at the time because I mean there wasn't like a Discord or I think there was IRC, but I wouldn't have known how to get there and stuff like that. Like it was
Uh-huh.
just Doom World and like old posts linking to PR Boom or something, and like I downloaded PR Boom instead of PR Boom Plus, and I was really confused like why it wasn't working.
Right.
Stuff like that was like a real problem back then. Um, but then I guess it was just interesting from TASIS probably.
Hmm.
Um, I know a lot of the early stuff I watched was more like there's videos of like someone like pitting monsters against each other and like stuff like that was and like I guess the flashy stuff. But then I probably at some point I got linked like recommended a test and I saw that. And,
Yeah. Yeah, because
um,
there was original Boom and then PR Boom and then GL Boom sounds like a different thing
yeah,
again, and then you have PR Boom Plus and GL Boom Plus. So pretty
yeah.
confusing.
PR Boom was like 2.5.0 and that sounded right. Like, I mean, they all have like Ticket Boom Plus always had like the same version number, and it
Mhm.
was very confusing.
Yeah. And then there's the demo format and all this other stuff that makes it difficult to get
Yeah,
involved. It's a
yeah. I think,
yeah,
yeah,
tricky to
yeah. I
penetrate.
think my early, one of the, some of my early demos would have been using the wrong comp level. I think I don't remember how much I did that, but I definitely think I did that at some point.
hmm
So yeah, it was complicated. And as a tasker, that I think at some point I found out about XDRE or I think DRE or I don't know if XDRE was even out. That's the building tool, and that is basically unusable. Like unless you have a guide for it, like
Yeah.
it's quite painful.
Yeah, I did want to talk about
Like it just.
TASs a little bit later on, actually. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um.
Okay.
So, like, I was looking through your runs, and you've worked on like quite a lot of Ironwood runs, and you do it in a lot of different categories too. I was wondering if you had like a personal favorite category, like between Nightmare, UV Speed, UV Max. Is there one that you have a preference for?
Um, it's really hard to say. I genuinely tried to like I've tried to split my running between as many different things as possible.
Yeah.
Which is why I've run so many different categories. Um, so it's really hard to say what is my favorite. Um, I think my favorite runs tend to reside in like the pacifist Tyson area, but not necessarily like it's more like I like any run where usually the ones that I've enjoyed the most that I remember the most are ones where I had to figure out really weird approaches to stuff.
hmm
And often pacifists and Tyson have that element of like it's kind of like a puzzle I guess. I like anything where it's sort of puzzling through a thing,
Yeah.
especially something that wasn't intended to happen or like is just completely new. So Maxis sometimes have that, but tend to be either like the author of the map intended it that way, which is cool but kind of different, or are more just straightforward. And like most pacifists though are like you just run to the exit and that's fun, and it can be addicting, but it's not that exciting, I guess. So it tends to be Pacifist and Tyson probably, but
Hmm.
um, in specific cases is when I really enjoy them. And then at times I'd say historically probably Nomo. I do quite like just the raw movement of Nomo, but that one doesn't. It just gets so hard on the hands and so hard to just perform at a
Hmm.
certain level that like it would be hard for me to really label it as a favorite or anything. Um,
Yeah. I did want to touch on nightmare runs a little bit because I guess I'm
mm,
curious what you would say are like the major differences between running a map on nightmare versus ultraviolence.
mhm. Do you want me to right now? Or is
Yeah,
that a question?
yeah. Like you
Okay.
can maybe focus
Okay.
on like a
Yeah.
specific level you can think of where like nightmare was extremely different to UV or something if you want, or just more generally.
Um. So I mean, the big difference is obviously it's hard. It's typically obviously Nightmare is harder, but not always. It depends on. It really depends on the level.
Hmm.
Um. I. I. I mean. Um. It's hard to even like. They are just very different. Like Nightmare to me, I really like Nightmare difficulty in general. I think it in part because the way it changes the game functionally makes it almost play like a different game.
Yeah.
Um, no, both because of the speed of the monster shooting, you can sort of there are a lot of different strategies, both abusing the fact that they shoot immediately and also dealing with the fact that they shoot fast and immediately. And the respawn element, I think, is also critical because it sort of forces you to you can't to not be stationary. I think just regular fast tends to be you can almost always, unless it's a very hard slaughter map or something like that, play very slowly with like a lot of corner camping and stuff, and it tends to get kind of boring
Hmm.
for me to play that way. Nightmare doesn't really have that, and I think that I mean those are the real main differences between the two. Um, I would say so. I mean, I would say to get. I mean, all different categories. I'd say one of the core elements is just having like solid movement, not like normal level movement, but good enough that you can just sort of navigate through fights and through around monsters and um, just in general around the fight or not bumping into walls or corners or things. That's really important across all categories.
Hmm.
So that's sort of what kind of brings them all together to me is movement specifically. But in terms of combat, I'd say Nightmare has a slightly different feel to it than
Hmm.
UV. So you sort of have to get used to different timings. Um, and um, so when like, coming from one to the other, like that's one of the bigger things you have to get used to is just like timings and sort of and strategizing how like monsters will behave depending on how they don't move or move more in UV. That's one of the big things. It's just different strategies.
Yeah.
Um, it's hard for me to think of a specific example. There's just too many runs to think of a specific example. I mean, any run where it's like a arch foul jump, Nightmare becomes immediately a lot easier often because it's just you can rely on that happening pretty consistently.
Yeah.
But then if there's a lot of harder monsters or hit scan or demons or lost souls, those are the really rough monsters on Nightmare, and a lot of backtracking. Then it becomes a much harder map really fast. And there's definitely maps where I've spent a lot of time trying to fill in the Nightmare slot just because it was dealing with a lot of potential respawns or something like that. Um,
Yeah. And yeah, I guess it's sort of like almost a weird amalgam of like pacifist and like and UV like a standard run because there are times where it's just not worth it to kill monsters on nightmare. I would assume because of the respawning. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, the main thing I think that makes me a little less I mean, I do enjoy Nightmare gameplay, but it's harder for me to be too into it just because. the RNG element is really high. I mean,
Yeah.
especially if you're trying to go for a fast time, you kind of have to rely on things not respawning or something because there's just nothing else you can do. Um,
Mhm.
and the added RNG for a difficult run is painful.
Yeah.
Um, but for an easier run, like often Nightmare, it's just much more fun. Like there's certain runs where I specifically did them on Nightmare, like Sunless Map 32, or there's one Archfall Jump map like that, where there's a strategy with Archfall jumping specifically where I just on Nightmare it works every time, so I can do much harder tricks and kind of more interesting things than I could on a UV run consistently.
Hmm. In terms of the iWords, I'm sort of, I think I've asked a couple of people this question who run the iWords, because I'm curious how difficult do you think it is for like a newer runner to get like a competitive time on an iWord map these days?
Um, I'd say it's definitely getting harder and harder over time, and it really depends on one's goals as well. I'd say like if it's a UV run, um, just like a regular speed or max, usually those are pretty good. Um, I would say IWAD runs are kind of both overestimated the difficulty and under at the same time. Like
Hmm.
you'll have a lot of people come in, they're like, I'm gonna beat E1M1 in 7 seconds or something, and like that's not gonna happen.
Yeah.
Any a veteran or like not knowledgeable runner will tell you that. But then you'll have someone else who will just say, "Oh, this is totally unbeatable." But there's definitely at least frames and often a second to get out of it somehow. Plus, you never really know if there's a new strategy. I think those are hard to find, but sort of something I try to never discount, I guess.
Hmm.
So that's sort of where it like I wouldn't if I'm right in the new in the community, I would prefer to run PWATs just because it's more fun and it will be an easier way to get better. If you as long as you continue to challenge yourself, you can sort of have meaningful rewards along the way for getting a record or a better time on a particular map without the fact that you're running the same map over and over or the same set of maps. So that's that would be a better strategy for a newer runner. But then again, I think there's still a lot of time to save. It's just a matter of someone doing some crazy trick or some a very difficult movement or getting crazy RNG in a particular map.
Hmm. I would imagine there's more like
So that's sort
routing
of
opportunities
yeah.
too for P-words, because I think the I-words are probably pretty routed right now, like have pretty strict routes.
Yeah. Yeah. It'd be really hard to find new tricks in the iWads. They've been combed through a lot. Not impossible necessarily. I mean, nothing's ever impossible, but or nothing's ever obviously impossible in this space. But um, yeah, that in PODs you can actually find some new trick or even unique stuff to PODs that you wouldn't have in an iWad just because there's not that geometry or that particular monster combination or something that would be really cool to do. So
Hmm.
yeah.
So you mentioned E1M1 in there, and probably one of your best known runs is your 8 second time of the run from 2019, which beat an incredibly long standing record. I guess I'm curious what what made you want to tackle that initially, and what went into getting the time down for that run.
I mean, it was always a big target, I guess, and I think part of what really like drove me towards it is I was getting better at movement, and I felt like it was feasible. And um, I think back then, especially, there was a lot of like you'd see a lot of people submitting to DSDA or speedrun.com, and they'd be like, "I have a 9 second time. I've tied the world record or something," and it kind of was almost it's technically true, but it's like almost a little annoying because it's just like, well, I mean, the only reason it's a tie is because like there wasn't really frames to beat. The frame beating tick beating is not something that happened and or like became more accepted until more recently. So it's kind of like overestimating the difficulty. Like 9 seconds is not that hard to get at a
Right.
top level time. It's hard to get a fast 9, or an 8, but it's just getting 9 seconds is not really an achievement. And I was like trying to just, I guess, put an end to that. Like all these random 9 second runs. I was like, how about no? Was kind of my thought, and I ended up causing more people to run E1M1. So I think I failed, but
Yeah.
I just don't. It's not. I don't never found it to be a particularly fun run for me. It's just someone had to do it, I guess, and I decided why wouldn't I do it? Like the start is really annoying. There's some randomness to it, and especially back then, like with like having to restart the game every time
Yeah.
you do a new attempt, and the fact that most restarts were literally 1 second long because you would just not get the start angle correctly. It got painful really fast. So
Hmm.
back then it was especially unfun, and I don't think it's even today I wouldn't consider it a particularly fun run. But with more modern movement standards and sort of strategies, it's much easier to get. Um, it's just I don't know. It's not really the most fun run.
Yeah. So, what were you like specifically looking at to improve upon from the original time? Like, what did you notice where you were like, okay, I can definitely have better movement here than this run?
I think it's mostly just straight 50, heavier use of straight 50, better timings, faster path. The biggest thing in the run, I think, that makes or breaks it is movement through the room with the bridge, with the zigzag
Hmm.
bridge. That part, you just kind of hope for monsters to mostly get out of the way if you want to get an 8 second, especially like a faster 8 second, which is what people are going for these days. Um, and then just better timing, um, modern movement, and is just really fast. I think. I mean, there were some runners in the early 2000s like Sedlow or I think High Django. There's a few runners who are known to have had like really fast, sort of modern feeling movement. But I think even today, most runners are just faster, um, because there's just a maybe I don't know if it's a higher standard, better equipment. I think that's a combination of both. Both just people working a lot, or just people having a much better understanding of how to move fast and having better muscle memory, and also just better equipment and better ports and stuff like that. It's kind of both factor into making people just faster in general.
Hmm.
Um, and then E1M1 was just it was just there's a lot of it was the old one wasn't that good. It was just the first 9, and over time people got much faster. So there was that distance between 9 and 8 became smaller and smaller, or seemed to become smaller and smaller.
Hmm.
Um,
And what's the word? What's the
so
record at now? It's 7 something, just below 8, right?
no, it's still 8
Oh, it is 8.
for
Okay.
E1M1. 8.80 is I think the
Uh,
current time. But it's technically improvable because I think Zero Master found some setup for like a small wall run that you can perform relatively consistently at the start, but not by much. It would be like an 8.6 something. I think is the current like potential, maybe more depending on if you get like a boost from a monster or something.
mhm.
Um, so it's gone a little bit down, mostly from depravity and confused human runs.
Right. I didn't realize those were names for a second, and I thought you just meant depravity was making it go down because people were so depraved that they would run E1M1.
I mean, yes, also true. I think
Yeah.
Depravity did like every single category and also every like difficulty level. I know it's a bit crazy. I just
Wow. Yeah.
did two, I think. I did speed and then max I had done a little bit earlier.
Hmm.
Um, I don't want to play one-on-one more than I have to. I think it's sort of that's been my strategy is just play it as much as I need to, and then like if people want to beat it, go ahead. Like I want the second, like I want to beat the old time, and I'm good with that.
Yeah. You got the big one. I feel like. I wonder if other people are gonna. Did it kind of spur people on to tackle the other, like, episode 1 times at the time, or not so much?
I don't. I mean, I think it did. It may have spurred like depravity or something. Like I know both of them kind of did a lot of both depravity and confused did a lot of runs in the episode, like ILs. Not so much the movie, like the episode runs. The full ones were already getting decent amounts of runs from either Zero Master or I think Dway's various runners were doing like episode runs and that was always a popular thing because I think
Hmm.
they're longer, so they're always more beatable. Whereas the ILs, I think, definitely got a little bit of a boost from but that run. But I think a big part of it was the Carl video, which sort of was. I didn't expect that to. I don't know if anyone expected that to become as big as it became.
Right.
Um, because he went on one was like 2019, and I don't know if Carl released that video until 2020, or maybe it was late 2019 or something, or later. It was certainly not immediate, and it was just sort of E1M1 was sort of just a like a Doom community known thing for a little while, and not like everyone knows about it and it's huge or something. And then Carl made it, and I guess that really took off for whatever reason.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
that happens randomly, I feel, on YouTube sometimes.
yeah, I don't think anyone could have predicted that.
Hmm.
Um,
So do
but I
you have?
think,
Oh,
yeah,
sorry, you go. Continue.
yeah, I think the big ones that really came out of that was like a lot of like E1M4 was another one that like brought it down to like 11 seconds or something. There was a few runs that were just like also short and they got down.
Uh-huh.
That's all I know.
Yeah, I think Vile's doing an episode 2 run at the moment, isn't he? I believe.
Yeah, he got his time like a couple days ago.
Oh, he
But yeah.
actually got it. Yeah, I saw him
Um
running it, but I never saw him
yeah.
get the exit. That's nice.
Yeah. Yeah, he got a couple, and I think his most recent one is recent, like from yesterday or 2 days ago or something.
Hmm.
Um but yeah. I think a
Okay.
lot of the episode one runs are also like really long, so that I think like you don't get the same. I mean, for one, you don't in general. E1M1 is the first map, so like everyone notices it, and it happens to be really short. So there's like this last second barrier kind of thing. Like you beat this 9 second barrier, you cannot be beaten by more than like frames. Whereas like E1M3 or something like that map is insanely random, shit tons of hits can, etc.
Yeah.
Um, it's it's a lot different, I think.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It does seem like E1M1 is like almost much like Map 1 of Doom 2, as in, like almost entirely movement.
Yeah, yeah. And map one and do two could be the next C1M1 if but like 4 seconds it just happens to be pretty far, and and there's not really a clear reason to believe that it's doable. It might be, but no one really knows for sure.
Yeah, that one is another one where it's actually pretty easy to. I don't know about now, but for a while it was like, is it like 6 seconds or something? There's a time that's like pretty easy to get if you know like basic movement on it, but then trying to
Even
get it
5 is
below.
pretty easy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and then you try and get it below that, and you realize like, okay, well, I can see why there's like such a barrier.
Yeah.
So are there other
Yeah.
runs that you can think of? I mean, you have like 3,000 runs or something on DSDA. Are there any that you can think of that you're particularly proud of?
Um, I would say like the big. I mean, obviously the two from this year, the two Tyson table fill, like the last Tysons for TNT and Plutonia,
Yeah.
that was kind of a big thing for me. I mean, that's precisely where I like my runs to be, is like figuring out weird approaches to things, especially with Plutonia. That one really didn't seem doable until I just started looking at it and found, lots and lots of different approach, like small strategies here and there, whether they were somewhat weird to pretty mundane stuff, like just luring monsters in the right direction and order to make things work out. Almost like a kind of like a chess game. Like the order of moves that you take in the map really matters for consistency.
Hmm.
Um, Besides that, I think like the Sunless Pacifist table filling, that one was kind of cool to have sort of completed the table. It's not something you would really think of happening, I guess. And
Yeah.
again, a lot of this weird strategies, cool tricks, stuff like that. And then Sunless 32. That there's a few maps that like I've sort of adopted, I guess, and Sunless 32 is one of them. And figuring out the nightmare route, doing that like jump, um, that it's and then doing it pacifist well before then. Um, all of that stuff was really interesting. Um, otherwise, yeah, it's hard for me to even think like there's runs that I've done that I just don't even remember. Um,
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's not
so
surprising.
I'll watch it and I'll be like, I don't remember playing this map.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
so
Sunless
that's sort of
32 is one of the first ones where I became aware of you, I think. And that that run is, it's such a short map, but very fun to get a fast time on because it has enough difficulty that it's like engaging, but it's short enough that you don't feel like you're ramming your head against the wall too much, I think.
yeah. Yeah, the max, that one I think I could still improve. That one was actually somewhat low effort when I did the new improvement.
Hmm.
Um, the nightmare like trick was like that's something that like that's sort of a lot of the runs that I really I think are stick to me is like whenever it's something that like to me is something that I would have never thought was even doable like sometime in the past. Like that definitely I would have never thought of doing a trick that elaborate in 2015 or 14 or whatever, and then I just eventually got to the point where it seemed reasonable for whatever reason. And but I also like just the fact that I like managed to figure out Tyson on that map in task. That run is kind of
Oh,
cool as
you did a
well.
Tyson of
Uh,
32 of Sunless.
tight task one, yeah.
I didn't.
It does
Yeah, I
like a
didn't see that
very
one.
it's a very strange strategy. I mean, the most fun parts I think were where I got a cyber to rocket a vial out of the vial section onto the floor, so I could use the vial to infight revenants that were on the pillars because you don't have enough bullets to kill them. And then the revenant fight is basically impossible, Tyson, because they just overwhelm you. But I managed to use a cyber to like infight them and sort of slowly move out of there. It was unexpected that that worked, but it somehow worked with enough just
Where's the
random
cyber that you can
messing
infight
around.
them with?
It's the one at the vials. So I had to basically it was like the vials. I did that part first, and then I have the cyber. Like that wall closes again. Like whenever you go to the revenants, the wall closes and it doesn't reopen ever again. Like
Uh-huh.
it's supposed to reopen if you go to the map normally, but it doesn't if you go to the wildfires first and then the revenant part. So you have to get like one or two shots from the cyber to get the revenants. So most of them are still trying to hit you. But then like there's a small bubble that I move in of like friendly revenants. It's weird.
Sounds insane.
Alongside the wall all the way to the teleporter. Yeah. And it's also it's pretty funky because the map, like the way that the ending at the ending, because the walls sort of like never went back down, or like they went down, like you actually see sky in the map where you're not supposed to, I think. So it just looks really weird because like the map is totally broken, like you don't see the outside area.
Oh wow,
Um,
I gotta watch that
because
run
the other
actually.
side I think isn't textured. Yeah, the other side isn't textured, and you're never supposed to see the other side because it's by the time it lowers when you go to the reference section and opens back up when you get back to the cyber section. But
Mhm.
in this run, you actually see what's on the other side, which is kind of odd. Um,
Yeah, I wouldn't have even thought you could do the map in that order at all. But yeah, interesting.
yeah, I mean that's how I did the original pacifist. I figured out that it was barely reasonable to do the vial part without ever taking the BFG. Um, so I did that non-test. The Tyson just sort of does that, and then on top of that, you have to figure out how to kill the rest of the map,
Yeah,
um, which is difficult. It would be too difficult non-test, I think. Um,
yeah.
but
Non-task
yeah, otherwise
Tyson
I
for
don't
that
even like
sounds
know.
pretty awful.
Yeah,
But who knows?
yeah, yeah.
Um,
I mean, there could be something that I'm missing.
the gauntlet's been thrown down for someone out there. Uh,
Yep.
so I mean, you have so many demos on DSDA. Do you find that you mostly play Doom to speedrun, and then casual play is less enjoyable for you?
I think so. I'm definitely one of those who just sort of found casual play much harder. Although even back when I started, I don't remember like particularly finishing that many map sets. It's
Uh-huh.
always like I'll get through like half of an iWad or I mean a megawad. Like I finished maybe like half of BTSX and half of Poogers. Most I think Sunless is one of the few that I actually finished. And there's a few others that are like I actually completed them. Most of them are short. And Sunless is the only one that's kind of on the longer side that I actually got through all the way.
Mhm.
Although even then, it's not like when I played Sunless, I wasn't even that good, so I kind of save scummed through certain parts. So that I don't know. Sometimes it doesn't feel like I really finished it, but um, so that's sort of where I've been. Like some of the wads I ran, I never even played them properly for whatever reason. Like I never played through most of Sunder. I think I got to 7 and I was or 8, and I don't know. The grind was getting to me, and I backed out.
Mhm.
Um, and that was after I had already run most of it. So, like by that point, I knew what the maps were. I just didn't really want to bother with rocketing thousands of Hell Knights or whatever.
It's the best
Um,
part.
so yeah, it's true. Maybe I did play. I didn't run one long road no churns map, and it was kind of
Your grind
it
for
was
the
a little
year.
cathartic.
It is, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
sometimes you have to be in the right
yeah,
mood for it, I think. But when you're in
yeah,
the right mood, there's nothing better.
yeah. Um, but yeah, I mean, typically I just don't. I mean, the one way I've really enjoyed to play Doom in the past, and sometimes I'll do it in these days is like I'll go on end games and I'll just click random. That's always gives
Uh-huh.
me enough like new different things to see. So I've played like hundreds of maps that way. Not all of them that I finished, but I've played through many at least or tried many. Um, and that sort of gives me that like variety that like otherwise like a megawad might just get samey for me, or like I just don't want to play the same map or maybe play the same map set anymore, and I just quit out of it. Especially if the maps get too long or something, it just doesn't keep me going.
Mhm. What What are your feelings like on maps that are built with speedrunners in mind? Like, are there things you wish mappers thought about more, or do you tend to like to work around things when you're out? Because you said that you know, most of your favorite runs are runs where you just had to figure out things that seemed impossible. So you prefer it when mappers don't think about speedrunners at all, and then you get to do all of the work yourself.
I don't think it's necessarily wrong to design for speedrunners. I think it has to be done the right way. Like the worst way I think is something I think Deus Vault 2. I never played it. I just know that like many of the maps have kind of just I want to know how to describe it. Just like give up exits, or sort of. They're in random spots, and you just randomly die and get into the exit, like by death sliding into a spot that isn't even the normal exit. I think, or something like that. It's a little. It's just too forced.
Uh-huh.
Even like Unholy Realms had a similar thing where like there'd be obvious built-in archfall jumps, and a lot of them were not even that interesting. Um, so I'd say it's fun when it's like in order to design the maps for speedrunners best, you either really want to be like a speedrunner yourself or get like input from them, because many of the things you really want to design for speedrunners around is more about consistency, like doubling your lineups, or um, so there's no lineup skips, or making monster closets work properly. That's sort of the really
Mhm.
important stuff. And then like adding in tricks to your map is something that like I would, if I do a map, maybe I will like make if a trick is naturally possible, I typically don't necessarily remove it unless it's unfun for me.
Yeah.
Like I don't like glides, so I won't have glides in my map for the most part. On the flip side, I will, if a trick looks like it could be possible, but it just barely isn't, I might make it possible if it will make an interesting run, or if it'll differentiate categories or something like that. So there is a little bit of like design for speedrunners there for me, and that sort of, it would be okay with a mapper if they make a trick possible because it would be fun. Then then that's cool. And I mean, some people do find glides fun. So I mean, if that's what someone likes, then they can add that too. Um, but I wouldn't say it's a really big focus. It should be a particularly big focus, and it could go really wrong if it's too forced, or too silly, or not really fun to do, or anything like that.
Mhm.
Like it'd be weird if you had 5 million bullets boxes in the exit just so you can Tyson the map. That could be fun for like a meme map, but if you're making a real map, like there's no reason to force Tyson to be possible or something like that. Like it'd be more interesting to try to figure it out, or just make it impossible. It's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the general consensus does seem to be like, don't make it too forced. Like speedrunners tend to
Yeah,
like to be creative, I think.
yeah. I think that there's sort of a mix of two. And then on the flip side, you could make like, I mean, there's map sets like Archfall Jump, like Megawad, or even Cyber Dreams probably had a similar thought process where speedrunners specifically made these map sets, or people who are associated with speedrunning, and they rely on speedrun tricks. They're sort of basically for speedrunners,
Mhm.
and that's its own kind of thing where it's basically the focal point of the map set, and it makes it somewhat okay, I think, because it's just like, I mean, uh, it it's just tricks. It's just like a trick fest. It's okay for maps to do that. It's cool for that to be a thing sometimes. Um, so that's another sort of way of like and I've made maps that are similar where it's just like it's specifically for tricks. Eric Column was also like definitely a speedrunner, and Scythe, I think. Run From It, for example, is
Yeah.
one of those maps where it's designed for that. And I
Mhm.
think most of his maps tend to have obvious tricks built in. And usually they were somewhat natural, and they made it more fun, at least in the case of Scythe, which like it in, Scythe, in my opinion, is one of the most fun wads to run, just because it's so well designed around that. It happens to be so
Yeah.
all built around just making things more fun that way. Um, and I think that that's also cool.
Yeah, that is a
Just
really
as
good
long as it's not
example
just
actually, yeah.
yeah,
Uh
yeah.
and it has it's map 31, right? With the Marines, where you have to get to the door in a set amount of
That,
time, I think.
that's Scythe too,
Scythe 2, yeah.
um, which I think is a little less. I think Scythe two tricks tend to be, from what I've seen, and I'm not sure how many of them are intentional, but many of them are a little bit less fun in my opinion.
Hmm.
Although a part of that has to do with like them not being workable in D2Ls because it's a much harder WOD to complete all the way through compared to Scythe.
Yeah.
Um, but also there's just some really annoying ones in there. And map 31 of Scythe 2, that one is less. I prefer it less because it's just that secret exit is much more painful and random to get to. Like Scythe 28, if you're good at the game, you can complete it. And if you're good at the game, like in terms of movement, you should be able to even complete it max, especially if you're coming in with weapons. Like that shouldn't be a problem. Whereas Scythe 2 is a little different, where like you could just get really, really screwed
Yeah.
on the exit,
It is funny
especially
to
in a
think,
single
yeah.
map run. Yeah.
Sorry, you continue.
No, even if, especially if it's, I just gonna say, especially if it's a single map run where like you don't get weapons, you don't get BFG, like you're
Uh-huh.
really, it's really hard, it's really random, even if you're really good at movement.
Yeah, I was just thinking about someone doing a D to all of Scythe 2, and then they get to 31 and have to get that secret exit, and how obnoxious that might
Yeah,
actually be.
yeah. I think in D2L you can kill like 2 plasma marines at the start with BFG. So I think
Yeah.
that's probably what it does. But I haven't really watched it actually.
Hmm.
Either way though, like that already slows down the run and makes it kind of annoying. I don't know. That one, I personally, one of the reasons I like Scythe more personally is because of speedrunning. It's just so much more. It feels so much nicer and cleaner. Scythe
Hmm.
2 has a little bit more, is a little bit more rough for that. Although it might be different if you're doing more maxes or certain categories. Uh, Scythe maxes are really really short, and they're a specific kind of, a very specific type of max, whereas Scythe 2 ones kind of are a bit more varied in that way. So maybe that makes them more interesting. Um,
I think of you as someone who, like, is pretty indiscriminate with what they run. I noticed you'd run Doom Junior, for instance.
yeah.
Um, what does a map
Yes.
have to have, like, for you to be interested in speedrunning it?
Um, I on the one hand, I think I've I have the opinion that everything made sort of deserves a run. It's interesting, even if it's not that good, to see someone complete it and try to figure out how to complete it. Um, it's sort of almost like a record of the map. It's kind of like archival. I guess part of it maybe comes from my interest in archiving like history in the Doom community and in
Mhm.
general, and just sort of that interest combined with the fact that if someone maxes a map, then there's a record of how to get all the secrets or which secrets aren't obtainable, what's the maximum you can get,
Mhm.
that sort of thing. Um, so that's a lot of the times I've maxed random, like completely random things. It's because of that. But then also, I would say a lot of meme ones like "This Sucks" or "Doom Junior" will just happen to be fun to run because they're simple and and there's just not much going on. Whereas by comparison to "This Sucks," something like BTSX will have a lot fewer runs on the page because the maps are very technically interesting and visually. It's a very very hard work WOD from all the aspects of its creation, but for running it just you don't, it's not going to be the most fun thing because when you run a map you're going to play it 100 200 times over at least, and once you're going into those numbers, a lot of those small things of like atmospheric parts of like atmospheric elements of the map, etc., will just start to grate, and you don't really want to do that
Mhm.
with a map set like that.
Yeah.
Even like Sunless Map 30, like that's a great map, but doing that beginning over and over immediately gets boring and old very, very fast.
Yeah.
And just because it's very slow, 20 seconds of doing nothing is not much fun. Um,
Uh huh.
so that sort of things that are fun to run are not necessarily the same things that are fun to play or interesting to play, and vice versa.
Yeah, it does seem. I mean, like Nirvana and mods like that. I think a lot of people are confused why that got so many runs, but kind of fits into that that same ethos of just being very simplistic
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, Nirvana is a very similar thing. And I don't BTNX I think got some not as many runs, but I didn't really play that one as much. But yeah, Nirvana has a lot of just like simple but fun maps for a run.
Mhm.
Um,
You touched on tasks a little bit earlier. I was curious for like people who don't really understand tool assisted speedruns. Could you go into a little bit about what like the process is for creating a tool assisted speedrun for Doom?
yeah, there's a few different ways to do it. So I think when I started, and most people would probably start with this, is just DSDA and PR Boom Plus back in the day have features of just saving, essentially saving a demo and then loading back in from a particular spot, either by re-recording or keyframes or um, rewinds, I guess, more recently. Um, and you can sort of, and also slow motion as well as automated straight 50, things like this. So there's different tools like that that essentially play the game, but you turn on straight 50 on all times because you don't have to press the extra keys. You
Hmm.
turn on or you slow down the game so you have more reaction or time to react, and you take as many times as you need to complete a section of a map until you get the result you need. That's sort of what I did with my earliest runs, especially with like the turbo runs and some of the other ones that I did early on, or basically this process.
Hmm.
Also, the other thing, the sort of small caveat is that there's also straight 50 on churns. And long story short, in normal gameplay, you can't churn while straight 50ing. But back in the day, they thought that that was possible. So tasks by default have always done that. There are
Uh-huh.
some like esoteric ways to do that with like weird controllers or something, but no real way. So it never became a thing in regular gameplay. You still can't do it, but tasks by default just do it all the time.
Uh-huh.
Um, so, and then a step above that is sort of the XCRE way, which is XCRE is a separate program that you can sort of just frame by frame look through a run, and it's kind of weird to use. There's some guides out there. Almost Matt made a really good one, but it's like one of the weirdest things is I think that you get started with is you will try to input a command and it won't do anything. Even the screen when you start it is just like black. So you just seems like nothing works. But I think you have to enter commands kind of just by words on your keyboard, like MF50 or something will be like move forward 50. And 50 is the default for running. It's not really the speed you're running at. It's sort of more like can correspond to how much you accelerate in the game.
Hmm.
And then you press space instead of enter, which is the weirdest part because like you wouldn't think to press space, I think, to complete an input, but that's what you do.
Uh-huh.
Um, and then that sort of gives you control over each frame, and then you can add frames, remove frames, and you can use any movement like you want. Like more normally, you'll be moving MF50 and straight 40. That's what SR40. That's sort of where that comes from, or SR50, which is when you have that extra speed. But you can have like an SR47 frame or MF34, and you can have that in real gameplay with like vertical mouse and stuff like that. But
Hmm.
with XDRE, you have the control to just put that anywhere, and then on top of that, you can see your position and everything. You can see all kinds of different details, whether you skipped a line or not, how close you are to different lines, and trace damage amounts. And then there's also brute force, which sort of gives you can sort of input like what you want to see. Like say you want to go through a glide, so you know which coordinate you want to be at when you're past the glide, so you input that coordinate and you sort of run through every possible command over like 2 frames that you could get there. And then, if you input the commands right and you have a real chance of doing that, it will tell you like, oh, you got through the glide or you got through the into the void or something.
Right.
Um, and that's another aspect of it. And all of that sort of combines, like, all these tools are what you get to just make what is really a real demo. Like, it's something that theoretically could be input into the game if someone had a uh, perfect everything, perfect frames, and every single frame was perfect. Like, it's the same as any run, um, but you can redo anything as many times as you want until you get the right RNG, the right number of shots to kill something, the right monster positioning, fastest possible glides, etc.
Hmm.
And you get with something that, I mean, it ends up to be a pretty cool product, although it's not technically real gameplay, but it's pretty cool to watch, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. I remember ages ago, like some of the first Doom speedruns I saw were like task runs of Sunder and stuff like that, where they would just sort of pull the entire map together into a big clump and then kill it all at the end, kind of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, I
A very
did.
different experience.
Yeah, yeah, I did one task of Sunder, I think, but not much. Doing like one of the hardest parts back then, especially, was the fact that if you had to re-record from the start, like, it would just be very slow on very big maps because you'd have to, like, when you re-record, what that sort of means is, like, the DST, PR Boom Plus or DSDA Doom will play the demo from the start all the way to the part where you're at. So if you're playing 40 minutes of Sunder, you'll have to wait for like 2 minutes or something for that beginning to part, and then you get into the game and you're like doing something, and then, like, you don't get the right RNG, so you have to go back to the beginning,
Right.
and do the same thing. And I mean, I remember No Chance was one of the ones that XLR maps that I did a test of, a max of, and by the end it was just like I'm waiting for 2 minutes for every monster to die in my demo until I get control so I can try something, and then it doesn't work, and it's like it makes it really hard to do really nice endings of tasks. XDRE kind of solves that problem because it's frame by frame, and rewind would also doesn't work that way because you can sort of, unless it's a really really crazy map, you can sort of rewind anywhere.
Yeah.
But back then it was a lot harder. Um, but yeah, I think the biggest ones I did were like the Doom Done Turbo runs. There's a few D2Ls that I did and like random ILs. It's really hard to, for me, I found that there was even a thread on Doomworld about burnout, and I sort of thought about how burnout in tasks for me is much more difficult. Um, I think because it's a lot harder to be happy with a task because you're sort of trying to do the best possible
Yeah,
gameplay,
exactly.
and if you don't feel like you have that, like, you don't feel like even attempting to go further.
Yeah,
With
because
a
yeah.
regular run, yeah, yeah, you can sort of be okay with something that isn't perfect, but maybe you got the time you wanted, or like you got the movement you wanted, or something. But maybe it's
Mhm.
not the best thing possible, but you're okay with that. With a task, it's just you can't you can't be okay with that. If you saw something that could be faster, it's really hard to get that out of my head.
Yeah.
And it's just so much effort to get a good run like that. It ends up being almost impossible for me to do anything that, other than like a small, short, like 10-second run, which could take hours. Like, even a
Right.
small 10-second run could take hours.
Well, yeah, because like perfection's
Like,
actually achievable with tasks, whereas it's not
yeah,
with a regular run.
yeah, yeah. I think I remember this year I did like Dimensions Map 2, which has that, like, exit. Like, it's that one with all the platforming,
Yeah.
and there's this like imp and archvile fight. And I theorized a long time ago that you can just use like every arch or like some archviles to jump all the way to the exit. And
Mhm.
that 50-second run took me like, I don't, a couple days, I think, because it was just so hard. It turned out to be much harder than I thought. Like, you just need every archvile to attack you at a perfect timing to get you that high and that far. And just doing that in a test is ridiculous. Like, and if you look at almost maps like Doom 2 tests and map 29, there's this crazy like jump to the exit staircase, like that sort of thing. That will take days to
Mm.
just do that one small bit. It's just insane amount of effort required to do something like that.
Should have done dimensions to a nightmare for those consistent files, much easier.
Well, apparently, I mean, afterwards, I realized that it was all pointless because there's a faster way of doing it
Right.
without that jump. Because I did a pacifist non-task, and theoretically, that run is right now it's slower, but it could be way faster.
Hmm.
Um, so that's the other problem. Like you'll find a faster approach. Like you're on map 20 of your test, and like map 13, you find a trick, and now you're like you have to redo at least map 13. Hopefully, you get the same RNG, but at the end of it, same ammo and stuff, or maybe you don't, and then you have to redo the entire run. It's just yeah,
Hmm.
it's a lot harder to be done with a run with a task like that, and then you might realize that it was all kind of a waste.
Right. Yeah. It does sound
Yeah.
difficult for someone who's probably already a perfectionist if they're speedrunning. Um,
Yeah.
so we talked about movement and how you enjoy that, and definitely when I think of you, I think of you as being one of the best speedrunners in terms of movement. Are there ways to get better at movement in Doom? Do you think like Noma runs are like a good practicing tool for people who want to get better?
Yeah, I'd say Nomo. I think th- it's hard to. I think there's even been thought of like creating a guide for movement runs, and I think there's something like that maybe that will come out at some point.
Hmm.
But it's just really hard to formalize specifically what makes movement fast. A lot of it is just practice. Um, I think the main things are like there's a few runs that are commonly recommended for like starting movementers to like get better, and it's like Doom 2 Map 31 is a really big starter because it just happens to be all flat and all doors, so you get a lot of practice of just churning and opening doors, and then turning and opening doors.
Hmm.
And that map on Nomo happens to be a really interesting. You can get really fast over time if you practice a lot. And Scythe Map 28 actually is another one where like it's very simple. There's little to no RNG even normal. I think most of the like I guess doesn't really have RNG, but like line skips and stuff like that could definitely help. And Scythe doesn't really have anything like that. Just super flat, straight 50 to practice different kinds of churns and different kinds of places like that. So you really want to find the right map to practice. I think anything with like really narrow hallways or something like that, whenever you have to bump walls, you sort of introduce a level of randomness because bumping collision in Dim is ridiculous.
Hmm.
And you might completely lose all your movement speed, or you might get wall run really fast and forward. So you really want to avoid stuff like that. And just do like Doom Map 31, Scythe Map 28. You ask, anyone in the community. I mean, all the movementers in the community are pretty friendly for like suggestions of stuff like that. And then just practicing not hitting walls and doors and stuff like that. That's the biggest loss in movement typically is someone just hitting a door or a wall.
Yeah.
You really want to avoid that. And then after that, it's like how fast do you churn? Um, you really want to churn. You really want to. I guess a lot of the fastest movementers end up being very confident with their churns. So it's like you churn straight into a direction, and then you just keep going. You don't. A lot of starting players will have like a whole bunch of like shuffling of like maybe they'll switch straight 50 directions or something like that, or they will sort of slowly like wobble or something, and that loses a lot of time.
Uh-huh.
So it really collisions, then churning, and then alongside of that, there's like timings of switches and doors and stuff like that that you have to practice.
Yeah.
Um, but all of it comes down to practice at the end of the day.
Hmm. And the scene feels like it's grown quite a bit recently, at least in the last few years. Are there things that you think could change about the current scene to maybe help more people get into running Doom?
For sure. I mean, I feel like we're increasing in size a lot, and there's a lot of new good things. I mean, DSDA, the new website, is much cleaner to use, I think, than the old one. Um, the DSDA to import is amazing, and like it's done so much, I think, for making runs uh, much easier to do. I mean, shout out to Craft for that one. Because a lot of people, I know I've seen a lot of people who are saying like, if I had to restart my game every time I had to do a new demo, I would never run Doom. Which I had to do that. So old man now, I guess, in the community. But yeah, that stuff is fantastic. But what we're really missing, I think, and we have some of that with like Miyagi's tutorials and Practice Hub. We're still missing a lot of guides, information on how to start running. Starting running is a little easier, I think. There's like a new uh, and there's a new intro post on Doom World from Maribo. It's really nice for like getting people into it. But there's a lot of details for like runs and tricks and learning missing from just in general. And it's really hard to get there, I think, because there's just so much. There's just it's a lot of work to create guides like that. Even the DSDA website can have a lot of stuff added to it. There's a lot of stuff missing. Still from like just features that would be really nice to have. Can't think of like an obvious example, but there are some that wouldn't. A maintainer and there's also just an uploader would be useful. But mostly I think it's just guides. They don't have a lot of.
Maybe a set section for speedrunning on Doom World or something that could be helpful.
Yeah. Or DSDA. DSDA has a guide section. It's just like quite bare bones right now. And there's like the movement Bible, but it's very much it's kind of out of date by now. It's for one, like it's got a lot of accurate information, but there are certain things that are kind of somewhat wrong or somewhat hard to parse. And then there's new things since then that aren't really covered. And then even beyond that, it never covered how to do things. There's no information about how to do a glide or how to do it.
Yeah, it's just the mechanical aspects of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And most of the time when someone has to do those things, they'll just ask someone who's a speedrunner, like, how do you do this? And then they'll get in VC and maybe figure it out that way.
So I guess you've actually done quite a lot of mapping for Doom, starting with the Abyssal and some other speed mapping sessions. What got you started with mapping?
I think it just at some point I was just like making random things. There's a couple like there's one map I made that I posted on Doom World I think a long time ago, and I never released it because it wasn't really good. Just like making stuff seemed interesting, and I don't remember why I got into like specifically the Abyssal stuff. I guess it's a lot easier for me to do an Abyssal map because you get sort of like a theme to I guess sort of limit your space for creativity. That kind of helps with just like knowing what to do because otherwise it's hard for me to figure out what I would want to do on the map. There's just so much for Doom that exists out there, so many creators, and even more now. That like it's really hard to stand out. I think these days, and then it's also just a short time, so you kind of end up releasing something, and that's kind of cool. I never really. I'm always somewhat like not really confident about like my mapping skills. I think in part because I can make interesting things, but it's very like I don't know how to. It's hard for me to just make my own map, I guess, because it's hard for me to come up with ideas if I'm just given a blank slate. I don't even know what I want to make. It's just there's just a lot of I wouldn't even know how to get started with the combat thing or something like that. Or I get platforming is easier, but then like visuals are tricky. And then it's just there's a lot of like there are a lot of steps that go from nothing to a fully detailed map that a speed map makes it easier for me to just do that anyway.
Yeah, it's definitely a great way to get started. Not only for new mappers, but I think if you do
Yeah.
struggle with that blank slate, then just drawing lines is usually the best way to to get to the next bit, which is kind of the fun part where you're actually constructing the map.
Yeah. Yeah, if I have like a map I'm already working on, I know that I can just like I'll work on it daily or something, and it won't be that much um, that hard to go from a room to another room or something like that,
Hmm.
and to do some detailing. Although I'm not like stellar at detailing, I think my detailing is pretty basic, but I can sort of create somewhat interesting looking rooms, I guess, with the right texture set and stuff. But then like starting from nothing and like creating a palette or something like that. I've been thinking about I've thought about like making my own sets, but then just like having that, not even knowing what texture set or palette to use
Hmm.
is very hard for me to like from nothing, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Palette work is it's definitely something you have to do at the beginning. I think about what to inform the theme, and I think you really just have
Yeah.
to mess around with it and see what you come up with. I guess target the green and blue range to begin with because they're the easy ones. Would be the only useful advice.
Mm,
Because if you touch the
easy
reds,
ones
you're
to like.
gonna have a bad time.
Okay.
Because the green is just like the cleanest because it doesn't bleed into a lot of other elements of the palette. But if you do the reds are actually anything that's red in Doom is usually made up of like 2 or 3 different ranges in the palette. So you change
Mm,
one part of it and then it will uh, break another part of it, kind of thing. So you have to be careful with those ranges.
yeah. Yeah, I'll have to. Maybe I'll mess around with it at some point. Um, I think it also just it's very uh, easy to run for me, so it's very hard for me to not run. I don't know.
Right.
It can be. There's been times at a time in history where it's like I'm often semi burnt out, but then like I'll do a runs anyway because it's just such an easy thing to do
Yeah.
when you already know what to do. And then I mean, it is somewhat of like kind of the addictive personality, maybe, or something that I have where, I mean, I just want to see that time at any cost, I guess, that whatever
Hmm.
6 or 7 or whatever on the screen. And I feel like that can take away from other aspects of my like creativity or like other like even like my real life in general. And it would be nice to sort of balance it more, but I'm still working on that, I guess. And speed maps help me with just like compartmentalizing that a bit
Uh-huh.
for well, at least the duration of S.
Yeah. And you made maps for like Noria and Pugas, and some of your Abyssal maps are also like more puzzle focused than combat focused. Do you intend to enjoy just like movement and puzzle aspects of Doom more than the combat overall, or like do you think that the experience of making those puzzles and movement things is the fun part?
I think for one, historically I think I've considered myself much better at that. I still think I'm not as good at combat as Derek um, or maybe Kinetic or something or Dubs. Like I feel like they're still stronger in combat scenarios than I am. Whereas movement wise, I've been uh, better than like most people, I think. And more recently, I think there's been like confused or back then I guess Looper was still better, but I still consider myself pretty high on that front. So
Mhm.
it's easier for me to know also how hard to make a movement puzzle or movement experience platforming section because I know what I can do. It might be too hard for most people, but I don't know that it's doable. Whereas with the combat puzzle, it's hard for me to target the really hard stuff. Um, but also, I think it's just easier for me to like if you're making a platforming thing. For me, it's just you just make the platforms further apart, and it immediately becomes harder. Whereas with the combat scenario, um, it's like figuring out where to place the monsters can be tricky, and you might end up with a fight that isn't fun, or maybe you'll randomly stumble upon a fight that is fun. Whereas with platforming, it's a lot easier to just not think about that. There's nothing really to think about. You just make a platforming thing that is in with the platforms far enough apart, or the jumps hard enough that it just ends up being fun anyway. Um, and also, thirdly, I think the thing that I've always thought about is that there's just, especially when I started doing speed maps, um, combat stuff was already sort of a thing in some niches. At least there was already some slaughter mapping going on.
Hmm.
And over time, I think that's community has grown and grown. And I think the puzzle platforming aspects of things have only recently sort of been more normalized, and even in challenge content. And back then, there was very little of that.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and I felt like I just wanted, if everyone else is going to make just regular Doom, I'll try to make something that's different. That isn't that is maybe targeting a very small subset of the community, but it's just new. Um, yeah.
Yeah. And I guess in terms of like mechanical glitches and stuff in speedruns, you talked about how you don't really like glides. What's your overall sort of feelings about things like glides and zero presses in runs? Just something you don't personally enjoy, or like what are the reasons for that?
I like guided glides. I just feel like unguided ones are just not that much fun.
Hmm.
They tend to end up being very random when it comes to doing them really quickly, because you just have to get in the right position, and it's just there's nothing that's something you can get consistent at. It's something you can get only better at, but not like really good at. Um, and that inconsistency has always been somewhat frustrating. It's also just very dependent. It gets a lot more dependent on your the way you churn, your churn sensitivity, and your vertical mouse. There's a lot of it's very precise movements that end up um, making it kind of depending on your hardware and stuff like that, and your settings. And that aspect of it has been it makes it kind of unfun to
Hmm.
me. Zero presses are not that bad unless there's some weirder ones that are kind of annoying to perform. Um, I don't think they make very fun runs, because you just have to get it really fast. But doing it in a multi-level run where there's not that pressure of getting it instantly is not that bad. I never found Void Glides that much fun either, because it looks cool, but it's just it ends up being very random to go through things like that, because you just have to smash your head into the wall and hope you get it.
Yeah.
Except for some of them where there's consistency to it. Most of them are just like that.
Right.
I like tricks that I tend to enjoy tricks that are either more or less consistent, like regular glides, or I mean guided ones next to a wall, or ones that my favorite stuff is really anything that has like rocket jumps
Yeah.
or arch fall jumps, because that just looks cool, and it's I don't know, it looks cool to me mostly, and it's just all you're doing is just jumping, and there's not really any. It can be really difficult mechanically, but it's not super random, I guess, beyond when you get targeted or something like that. It's very very mechanical, I guess. That's what I like about it.
Yeah. And I mean, I know a lot of speedrunners, like, a big thing with their runs is sort of the aesthetics of the run. Like, you talked about task runs and
Yeah.
wanting them to be perfect and stuff. And I think a lot of it is like, I don't know, maybe you
Yeah.
bump into a monster right at the beginning and you just reset because you don't want that to be in the demo, kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah. And I think that's just sort of where arch fall jumps just look very pleasing, especially if it's like a double one, or one with like weird weird angles and stuff like that. It makes it look really unexpected, I guess, and not something you'd expect to see. I remember there was like a Halo task I watched where, and apparently a lot of what they do is just like go through walls, and that stuff is apparently really technically difficult, but just not that much fun to watch, because it's like
Yeah.
a whole bunch of nothing. But then they're on the flip side, they'd have these tricks where they would attach like 5 grenades to a
Yeah,
warthog and just blast themselves over gaps or up things. And that stuff for me is just I love watching those kinds of things.
yeah.
And the same thing with Doom is similar. I want to see the flashy, crazy, jump 5,000 units or something over, bump into a wall 100 times and hope you go through.
Yeah, I know Halo 1 has this specific grenade jump you can do where you get an overshield, so you get, for anyone who hasn't played Halo, you basically get a ton of health, but you also get invincibility frames while the thing is like charging up to fill your shield bar up. And during that time you can throw like it's like a level that has like a bunch of platforms on top of each other for each level of the area, so you can like basically dump a whole bunch of grenades underneath you while you have these iframes, and then like blast yourself all the way up to the end of the level basically, which is a really fun trick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's the sort of stuff that's super cool to me.
Yeah, but then yeah, there are a lot of out of bounds things as well, and I am in agreement that I generally find that stuff a bit less interesting to watch, even if it is technically impressive. And my favorite Doom runs do tend to be like very impressive movement runs or very impressive combat runs, unless so the super glitchy ones. But I think it's nice to see a void glide every now and then because they're not super common, I think.
Yeah, I think they do look interesting. I mean, they're like someone going out of the wall is just kind of cool in general. But it's I for me, I mean, the other thing is like some regular archvile jump isn't super exciting, but like I said, if it's like towards the archvile or you're sort of maneuvering midair, or in one of my archvile jump runs, that's that archvile jump mega wide. I like use like 3 archvile jump on Nightmare to sort of like jump backward. Like it's sort of like these alcoves, kind of. There's one alcove, a wall, and then further back behind you another alcove, another wall behind you, another alcove. So I'll jump from like the forward one around the wall back, and then another jump like that. That stuff is really, that's what I like to see, I guess, in runs, and what I like to do is where it's like you're sort of midair, maybe doing some crazy stuff like that. Where it's like it's movement that you wouldn't expect to perform in a regular run. It's just sort of like that sort of thing, yeah.
I feel like D2Ls are sort of very popular at the moment, or like longer episode runs, things like that. Is that something you're interested in personally, or do you prefer like the quicker, punchy runs and like table filling and things like that?
I think I typically just don't have the time for that, it's really, I've done some. It's very hard to motivate myself to do a really long run because it takes so long. Um, unless it's a table fill where like I can sort of go slow. I just don't. I know Sunless they do all, for example, for both Derek and Nirvana's. That was a multi-month affair of attempts, and each attempt is most of your day gone. I just don't typically have that sort of luxury.
Yeah.
And if it's like a sub 2 hour run, I can sort of do it, but that has to be easy enough that I can sort of expect to get it with some reasonable amount of time. I still want to get back to Scythe T2L. That was a run that I ran at ESA, and also just had the record for a little while. And that one's pretty short and fun. But the other thing is like I think a part of it's also that same perfectionism. It's a lot harder to achieve a really clean D2L. And if I want to get back to Scythe, I kind of want to get back to it and just get a time that is really hard to beat. And so I have to like know that like for the next couple months I can just keep running this, and that it's hard for me to find those windows these days.
Yeah, I think I remember you doing that ESA run. I remember just thinking it was cool that there were PWADs being run at an event, for one thing.
Yeah.
Do you think like there's a possible Because like Derek ran Fractured Worlds for GDQ, like a little side event for first-person shooters that they do. Do you think there's like a possible avenue for Doom to maybe get some PWOD content at AGDQ or something?
Yeah, I think I did the Scythe at the hotfix for that one too. I would
Yeah,
like to go to GDQ again. I just don't. I'm not super interested in going to it online. Um, I would
yeah.
rather go to it. And for me, those events are not. I'm not really big on conventions in general, but it's an excuse to travel and just hang out with people, especially people who happen to do like the same things I do, or run the same game.
Hmm.
So if I'm not traveling, I just don't really care enough to join.
Right.
So
Yeah.
if GDQ comes back to in person, maybe I'll submit Scythe, but I'd have to practice it first again, I think. And I kind of want to just, I want to really get back to it at some point and maybe get like a proper run of it again, get back the record, and then maybe I would feel comfortable doing it. I just want to feel like I know the WAD again, or it's like my run again.
Hmm.
But it's just been a while since I ran it, and been a while since GDQ was in person. So
I think it's like a hybrid event right now. I think they do like the last SGDQ they did was like in person, but then they also had online people. So I think they are doing the in person event again, as far as I know.
maybe, yeah, I'm not sure. I'll see how next year goes. I do want to go to QuakeCon, but I don't think there's going to be. I doubt that there are runs there. But yeah, it would be nice to get back to that sort of thing, or to try that sort of thing again. It was fun at ESA for sure. That was a fun trip.
Yeah, it must be fun getting to run in front of like a live crowd kind of thing as well.
Yeah, I wasn't. I'm not like. It's hard to commentate, especially with something like Scythe, where every map is like 10 seconds long. So I don't. I didn't do much of that during the run.
Hmm.
It was mostly just me running. I didn't feel like it was super stressful for me or anything. I had like it because I probably because I didn't have to commentate, perhaps, or like I had commentary sort of settled for me.
Yeah.
Just doing the run, like I felt pretty confident that I could do that. And it's I feel like marathon runs for me aren't as it's because you can die and reload. It's not as stressful. Um,
Right. Yeah.
but I don't know. I think GDQ like the standards are going up and up. So I don't know if they would even. I assume they'd accept it, but I don't know. I'll see if I ever do try that again.
It would be cool for sure. Uh,
Yeah.
so I guess to the final question, which I ask everybody, what is your favorite Doom monster and why?
I'd say definitely the Archvile. Um, just because they're so mechanically interesting, and
Yeah.
especially as a speedrunner, jumps and blast damage, and the fact that they have blast damage on the regular hit. Um, that leads to a lot of interesting scenarios, opening doors from the other side. Their speed, the fact that you can have a Romero spawn 70 of them and jump like 30,000 feet in the air, like in Noia Map 30.
Hmm.
Um, that sort of stuff is cool to me. Uh, so that probably the Archvile. And they're just fun to combat. I think when I make a map with combat, it's really hard for me not to just have like a whole bunch of Archviles VFG because
Yeah.
I mean I love Sunless 32 and every single fight like that. They're kind of samey, but they're also just typically fun for me. Um, and they can be somewhat different if you have like a different scenario of how the Archviles are laid out. Like you end up having an interesting change to it, and it becomes fun again. Um, if I had any like honorable mentions, I would probably or more unusual picks, I'd probably say Lost Soul or Pain Elemental, just because in terms of like being mechanically interesting, they're one of the other monsters that has like very weird abstract mechanics that like make
Hmm.
like in like the fact that Lost Souls fall asleep and like Pacifist of E2M8, for example, where like it just kills a cyber demon through weird shenanigans. That sort of thing is really cool to me. But like my serious answer would be definitely Archvile.
Yeah.
And they're also just fun to play with in general, like in like even in regular combat outside of tricks, they're really cool.
Yeah. Definitely.
Reviving, I guess. Didn't mention that, but
Yeah. I mean, they
yeah,
have so many weird
yeah,
mechanics. The 20 damage thing you can
yeah,
do with certain, I think it's like 32 height.
yeah, that too.
Yeah, where you can block part
And
of
then
their
like
attack, and because their attacks are weird and made up
yeah,
of two separate components and stuff, and there's just a lot of really
yeah,
weird esoteric stuff with vials.
yeah, and then they can shoot you from only a certain distance, but then if they get hit pain chance, they can shoot you from further. There's a lot you can do with just using them in weird ways in both runs and maps, and also just using them regularly, I guess.
Yeah, but yeah, I guess Lost Souls also have that weird thing where they can't they can't go over items for whatever reason.
Yeah, that too, I think has like it does work in certain maps. Like if there's a Noia map that basically abuses that,
Yeah,
um, where there's a
definitely
lot of
untapped
things moving through the
potential.
floor. Yeah, yeah,
Um,
and Pain Elementals, like one of the few monsters alongside Archfells that can like kill themselves through their own lost souls. I guess it's one way that they're similar. Um,
mhm.
very few monsters you can just like get them to die to their own self. I think they're the only ones probably. So
Yeah, vials and pain elementals, I guess.
and yep, that's it. I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Um. Well, it was really great having you on. Very insightful.
Hmm.
Really interesting to hear about like the like tool assisted runs and just the like complexities and intricacies of trying to beat very established runs like with E1M1. I definitely had like a lot of very specific questions and you answered them all very well. So it was fun having you on and I'll catch you later, I guess.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. It was a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it was fun. So that'll wrap it up, and I'll be back next week with another guest, top secret guest. So thank you for listening, and goodbye.